This is the Walt Disney World Resort in Orlando, Florida. It's hot, expensive, humid, crowded, cramped, fake, expensive, corporate, expensive. It's a place for childless millennials to go escape reality. Why go travel the world when you can go to EPCOT and drink around World Showcase? Why go experience culture and explore history when you go on a roller coaster and sleep in a glorified Hilton hotel themed to Moana? Theme parks are just pretty up shopping malls that people pay to enter. That's what I would say if I was a theme park hater. But, plot twist, I love these things. Theme parks are so cool. They have completely consumed my mind. Everything else I like derives from my love for theme parks. I like musical theater and video games because they are like theme parks. I like certain albums because they remind me of theme parks. I like certain movies because they remind me of theme parks. My desktop, laptop, and iPhone backgrounds are all of theme parks. I am obsessed. And I've been obsessed all my life. For as long as I can remember, I've been super hyper focused on these things. And all the time, I get asked why. Why do I love them so much? Now, part of it is just because they're fun and I'm nostalgic for them. Roller coasters are fun, the places are pretty, you usually go with people you like to be around. But I would also argue that part of my love for theme parks is a love for them as an art form. The nature of a theme park puts it in a position to immerse its guests in a way that no other form of art can. But for a variety of reasons, they've never been able to really reach that level of artistic capability. Though, there are a few shining examples sprinkled about. So let's do exactly that. Let's take a look at some of the best theme park experiences, and figure out what that extra special quality of theme parks is, and figure out what is holding them back, and by the end, we should have an answer to the question, do theme parks matter? Before we get too deep, I want to preface that I will be focusing specifically on parks like Disney World. There are two reasons for this. One, theme parks that Disney makes are some of the greatest in the world, and two, I've only really visited a select amount of theme parks. There are great examples though of foreign Disney parks, or even other non-Disney parks, they can do the same exact examination as I'm doing here with. Now, I would love to have traveled to Disney World to record this video, but unfortunately it just wasn't quite in the budget, so I had to do the next best thing and visit it in Minecraft. This right here is the Epcot Center theme park as it was sometime in the 80s. If you've seen other videos on this channel, you know how much I love Epcot. I already have 1.5 videos dedicated to it, so there should be no surprise that I think this place is the best. The original concept of Epcot was for it to act as a permanent World's Fair, to show off the innovations of American industry and promote global unity. The hope was for guests to leave with a special kind of bounce. If the Magic Kingdom was for guests to escape from the world, then Epcot would be to inspire guests to head back into the world and improve it. It most definitely succeeded on that end. I haven't taken a survey of people or anything, but I can confirm that personally, Epcot has inspired me to go out and study math and science. But that already kind of answers my question of whether or not theme parks matter. They do, to me at least, but maybe I'm an outlier, or I've looked into these things too hard. Let me try and really show you what I love about them. My favorite part of Epcot is Future World, which at one point was divided up into 9-ish pavilions, each one showing off a facet of human development, whether that be communication, agriculture, or art. The aesthetics of Epcot were incredible. Each pavilion has striking, geometric exterior, and beautiful new age music played. Part of what makes theme parks so unique is that they really are the ultimate art form. They are an amalgamation of architecture, music, film, video games, and theater. Let's say you like musicals. Well, they have some pretty great musical performances at theme parks. Or you like architecture. We'll just walk down Main Street and look at the castle. Or how about you take a look at arguably the world's biggest geodesic sphere? Maybe even like something that isn't often appreciated as an art form, like robotics. Well, theme parks have some of the greatest works of robotics out there. Definitely some of the greatest that the average person will ever see. So let's focus back on Epcot. All of this comes together at Epcot to create this beautiful and inspiring futuristic world. There were beautiful murals, exhibits, and I'm going to keep coming back to this one. The music of this place was just incredible. One of the greatest attractions at Epcot, and I would argue in the world, was Spaceship Earth. The version we have now has been improved in certain ways, but has also been dumbed down in others, but everything I'm going to argue for today still stands with the current version. In a nutshell, this ride is trying to show how civilization grew through cross-person communication. Spaceship Earth is what people call a dark ride. It's kind of a broad category. It's a usually slow-moving attraction that usually takes place inside and in the dark to usually tell some sort of story. Think Pirates of the Caribbean, It's a Small World, or even Tower of Terror. Dark rides are really cool because they are basically a combination of the best parts of film and theater. Theater has a three-dimensional aspect to it, but you can't easily move your viewers around. You either have to do some creative visual trickery, or close the curtains and exchange all your set pieces. Also in most theater, the guest is far away from the stage and sort of separated from the action. Movies fix the downside of theater. It's much more immersive, especially on a big screen, and you can just move the camera around, but it loses that 3D part of it. What a good dark ride does is combine the two. It has a three-dimensional quality to it, there's physical and real animatronics and sets, but instead of having to switch out those sets, you can now just move the viewer. And not only can the viewer be moved, but they can be put up close to the action. The action is no longer on a faraway stage, but now happening right in front of the rider. Dark rides also dabble in another human sense that other art forms can't: touch/spatial awareness. Dark rides can shake and move you around. Spaceship Earth uses this, sort of accidentally, at the end of the ride, when you descend back to the loading zone. The track sends you backwards and is at an angle so that you're laying backwards a bit. And this part of the ride adds a little bit of flavor to the whole experience, and ironically kind of wakes you up a little bit. On Spaceship Earth, all the benefits of a dark ride come together to create something truly incredible. One incredible moment in the ride is right at the beginning. You're in this dark tunnel, there's some beautiful music playing in the background, some great narration, then a gust of wind comes in and you're met by this massive screen of a caveman hunting woolly mammoths. Another incredible moment is during the Renaissance portion, when the music transforms into this beautiful choir and you get to see, up close, Michelangelo painting the Sistine Chapel. Finally, and my favorite part of this attraction, right at the end, the music again begins to build up and your ride vehicle turns out to look at a projection of Earth, recreating that classic Earthrise photograph. But unlike just looking at the picture, for just a moment, it feels like you are actually in the photograph, truly looking back at Earth. The dark ride lets you be in these moments in a way that no other production could. Everything feels more real because it is in 3 dimensions and right next to you. And that realness makes it so much easier to become invested in the message and the story of the ride. There's also one more quality of a dark ride that really helps these attractions succeed. It's not the simplest to explain, so I'm going to try to use a story I heard from one of the greatest Imagineers, Tony Baxter. So decades ago, Mr. Baxter was out visiting Paris, and he was on a tour bus. The tour guide is out on his microphone yapping about the history of Paris, probably talking about the French Revolution or something, but Baxter does not care. Instead, what has his attention is the everyday life of the people on the streets. Whether it's a weird-looking lady and her weird-looking dog, a young couple on a date, or a bunch of cats searching through a trash can. It's those tiny, wordless stories that capture his imagination. It's kind of like when you're watching a musical, and you start focusing on one specific background dancer, and see all the interesting little actions and mannerisms he does. Now, Spaceship Earth unfortunately does not use this tool to its fullest extent, but there are still a plethora of examples from across the ride of these little stories that help capture the attention of the viewer and point them to the greater story of the ride. Another attraction that does this very well is, surprisingly, Expedition Everest. I say surprisingly because this ride is very story-based, and it's also a roller coaster. Tony Baxter's point with that story was to argue that rides don't really need grand, overarching stories to be engaging. Actually, they probably shouldn't have those things. Spaceship Earth does have an overarching story, but it's kind of exempt from this problem because of how loose the story is. All of its scenes are enjoyable in isolation as well as part of the story. But Everest definitely has an overarching story. So how does it use and succeed with this tactic? Well, first of all, Everest is a roller coaster, so there's really not any chances for it to use this tactic because of how fast you're moving. Though, for what it's worth, during the slower portions of this ride, like on the lift hill or during the broken track scene, there were a lot of things to look at. But when Everest mainly uses this method is during its queue. Everest queue seems to take you through a Himalayan village, into a mountaineering gear store, and finally into a museum dedicated to the Yeti. And throughout all these locations, there are all these individual items that all tell their own little story, whether it be a newspaper or a mess of climbing gear. Actually, walking around the whole park, you can find this kind of storytelling. Just simple things like fake advertisements on a wall play into the story and message of the park. Animal Kingdom is a park about human and environment interaction. How nature inspires the human imagination, how nature improves or hurts human life, and how human life improves or hurts natural life, with the ultimate goal of inspiring conservation and environmental consciousness. Animal Kingdom, because it is a theme park, is able to display these themes in a very interesting way. Instead of using characters or a plot to tell its message, it can use the environment of the park. This is called environmental storytelling. And while this can be used in other mediums like film and video games, it is best in a real and physical environment, like at a theme park. The very existence of Animal Kingdom is a demonstration of its theme. It is a place built by humans, inspired by natural life. But the actual elements in the park play into the theme as well. We've already talked about how the Expedition Everest coaster shows how the people surrounding the Himalayas have been impacted and inspired by the mountains. The Kali River Rapids attraction visualizes how forests are hurt by foresting activities. The Kilimanjaro Safari attraction used to have a segment dedicated to the harms of poaching, but there's also very simple things, like the advertisements mentioned earlier, or even just the patterns of fabric used about, that show human-environment interaction. One interesting example is the old Dinoland USA area, rest in peace, which showed the influence of dinosaurs on American culture. Dinoland shows this old American tourist attraction focused entirely on dinosaurs, including dinosaur roller coasters, carnival games, playgrounds, and restaurants. The land represents the many, very real dino crazes that America has experienced. If books and movies are great for putting you into the shoes of another person, and if songs help you inspire new moods within you, then a theme park is the best way to put someone into an environment, both place and time, that they've never been to. Theme parks, executed to their fullest extent, can introduce their guests to cultures in a subtle way second only to actually going to those places. And if those places and times no longer exist, then a theme park is the best way to try to experience them. To be clear, theme parks, when it comes to this environmental storytelling aspect of them, are forms of fiction. They are not real. Even if they try to be perfectly honest with what they represent, they will never be a perfect recreation of it. There will always be some human bias in the creator of what they chose to put in and what they chose to keep out. Even if it was a perfect recreation, the employees you hire and the tourists that are visiting will make it so that it is not. But that's part of the power of theme parks. Obviously, not all American roadside attractions were dedicated to dinosaurs, and not all Himalayan towns are dedicated to mountaineering, and they are definitely not all dedicated to the Yeti. The designers are obviously magnetizing certain aspects of these cultures to try and make a wider point. This can be used for positive and negative purposes. You can use a theme park to make it look like a certain historical group acted differently than they truly did, and because you're doing this in a real environment, it'll be much easier to believe you. But you could also, in the case of EPCOT, use it to show how cool and helpful industry and technology are. And I'm sure there are plenty more crazy uses of theme parks that we just haven't thought of yet. Unfortunately, it is true to say that theme parks have been heavily underutilized. EPCOT and Animal Kingdom are the two greatest examples I can think of, and even they barely scratch the surface of how powerful theme parks can be. Theme parks are simply too expensive to build and too expensive to visit for them to be fully used in this way. They need to appeal to the largest audience possible, because they need millions of people to visit them a year to sustain themselves. And honestly, theme parks are vacation destinations. They need to appeal to the largest audience possible, because they need millions of people to visit them a year to sustain themselves. It is important to remember that. They're meant to be relaxing and fun places. EPCOT and Animal Kingdom will work because they are relatively inoffensive and entertaining topics that appeal broadly. People like animals and technology. Those things are cool. Those parks are also generally optimistic places. There's a lot of hope in them. You're not all bummed out when you leave. Contrast those parks with something like the Scrap Disney's America theme park. That park would only really appeal to Americans, but even of all Americans, there's a certain percentage of Americans that will probably see it as propaganda and would therefore refuse to visit it, or at the very least prefer to visit another park. So now you're already left with a relatively smaller number of potential visitors compared to a park like Disney World. But now you've also got to consider the actual content of the park. The park would have featured a section devoted to the horrors of slavery, which is obviously an important thing to talk about in a park about American history, but it's also incredibly sad. You're going to have a hard time finding people willing to travel and buy a hotel room and pay $150 for a ticket to go on the slavery ride. So what you're left with is a relatively much smaller group of families and school tour groups. And that is just not enough to sustain and pay for a theme park. So theme parks are limited in the content they can cover. So what, I hear you asking me? We have this cool and powerful art form and we just can't do anything with it? Well, you might have noticed that throughout this video, I've been sort of using the terms themed entertainment and theme parks interchangeably. But there is a difference between the two. Theme entertainment is the name of the industry that theme parks are a part of, but that industry also includes things like museums, zoos, escape rooms, even casinos, or the work of companies like Meow Wolf. I can't go into too much detail about Meow Wolf's work because I've tried to avoid spoilers for when I eventually get to go in person, but I'm sure you've seen some of their stuff like their trippy grocery store and Mega Mart. Meow Wolf creates these really cool and unique artsy sort of theme park-like experiences, but most importantly to us, they aren't that expensive. These projects are still expensive. You probably don't have the money to just go out and build one yourself, but they've laid the groundwork for future smaller attractions to be built. And these future attractions could use some of the techniques talked about here today to tell their stories in a way unlike any other art form. So yes, theme parks matter. They are an interesting and unique form of art that when used correctly can be as powerful as any other medium. They just need to be given the chance and the funding to shine.